starting and say good morning. And we always begin with a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher Amen. So we are in Genesis chapter 2, the 3rd verse. So we're in the middle of learning about this mitzvah of Shabbat. So God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that God had done. And verse 4 wraps up this moment. These are the generations of the heaven and earth when they were created in their creation. So we were talking a lot last time about Shabbat, and first of all, this idea of Shabbat being in memory of creation. God rested, we rest. Creation was not complete until not creating had been created. And the fact that a second reason for Shabbat is given later on in memory of the Exodus from Egypt. So our Shabbat observance and our liturgical references to Shabbat combine both of those thoughts. The idea that we are resting to remind ourselves of the creation and God's rest, and we are resting to declare our liberation from slavery to freedom, as evidenced by the fact that we have control over how we spend our time, which is something that slaves do not have. So we express that each week by consciously taking a step back. So, we've been talking a lot about particularly how we use technology, or how we are slaves to technology during the week, and how we can leverage the technology to meet our needs to rest and to have one day that is a day devoted to holiness. And what might that mean? So as we didn't meet last week, there was no religious school, and we won't meet next week because of Thanksgiving. But as you've been reflecting on Shabbat and enjoying at least 2 Shabbatot then, since we have been together, how has your Shabbat been an expression of holiness?
Well, I guess I'll start because I can't stand a vacuum. I haven't lit candles in a long time because I usually went to shul and I just didn't light them at home, and for a variety of reasons. But Noah loves to light the candles, my grandson, and we are fortunate to have him with us every Friday night. So Friday night and Saturday have taken on a very new meaning in this year for us, because we don't do much, but we light candles, we say Kiddush, and we break bread and do the whole thing, because
that's nice. Our practice has always been that even though I'm at services and we light candles at services, Ron and I like to light candles also at home. So when we get home, even though it may well be after the official candle lighting time, we still light our own candles in the house in addition to the ones at the temple. So David says he's cooking for friends that are sick. I'm never certain about prayer, but soup works. That's a great line.
My Shabbos started out very beautifully yesterday morning. In this lousy, crazy year of 2020, my grandson called me from Dallas to tell me that he has just given his girl an engagement ring. So we have something to look forward to in this crazy year. But I'm sure they won't get married in this year anyway.
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
This past Shabbos was very special to me because we celebrated my friend's 98th birthday.
Wow.
And we had a Shabbos dinner in honor of his 98th birthday.
Wow.
So
That's marvelous.
Mhm.
And Sherry says she's definitely taken a step back to have a conversation with God out loud. So Sherry, do you want to say a little more about what you mean by that?
Well, when I'm in Arizona, I try to get to the temple on Friday nights, and then it's a very internal conversation between me and God. When I'm standing here in my kitchen and I light the candles, it's it's just a more open conversation somehow. Talking about how thankful I am for so many things in my life, and asking God to watch over some people who are ill, and I don't know, it strangely enough, it feels more intimate. I miss the camaraderie. I miss that whole sense of community, but there are aspects of it that are positive. So, you take what you get.
I heard from so many people after the high holidays, a statistically significant number of people, that they found the high holidays this year even more meaningful than they typically experienced coming to the synagogue. And that was so counterintuitive to me. But the sense was that they could focus more just on the words and the experience of prayer without the distractions of the social environment, let's say.
I would agree with that, with one exception. I longed for the healing service. That was the place that I found the greatest void. So again, pros and cons.
Yeah.
I
Well,
found the,
God willing, we'll be in person next year for that.
I'll abide.
Oh, please, God.
yeah, I found that the sermons being given on Zoom with discussion during that process was absolutely wonderful. It was so personal, so meaningful, and so spiritual.
Yeah,
So it's so much better than watching TV relative to live streaming.
Yeah, I think that having the sermons with the discussion format is something that probably will be a change incorporated even in a non-pandemic moment.
Marvelous.
I found that even though we're supposed to be, technologically closed down for Shabbat and high holidays, the fact that we have it for this purpose was very meaningful to me. I could connect with people here. I could connect with people in Los Angeles. There were some meaningful discussions between here and the conversations with the sermon studies, as well as some really important conversations in Los Angeles and where I have family that are rabbis across the country. With the time difference, I'm able to do a lot of Shabbat. But I'm finding that at least we can't be together, but at least we're connecting and having some really meaningful conversations as far as what prayers mean now and how to work them with what's going on in the world at this point. So as much as I would like to turn it all off, I'm very grateful that I have it and that I'm able to participate in it. And I think that's, I'm sitting at home, but at least I'm part of something.
Yes. And part you can be through the use of the technology part of so much more.
Right.
You have a more expansive Shabbat opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Terry mentioned the Kiddush. So as a reminder that these first three verses of Genesis chapter 2 are the opening of the Friday night Kiddush. So I had mentioned, and I'll just repeat, that has elided out of the communal practice of the Kiddush at Temple Chai. I don't know about other Reform synagogue. When we say Kiddush, typically it's introduced by this exact text lifted directly from the Tanakh into our homes. I wanted to take a look at, I'm reading from the Eitz Chaim, the conservative prayer book, and there's an interesting comment on verse 3. Legend has it, and when they say legend, they mean the Midrash, that God created other worlds before this one, but was not pleased with any of them. One world was based on the principle of strict justice. Anyone who did a wrong was punished. Every righteous person who gave in to temptation was struck down. Rejecting that world, God fashioned a world based on the principles of compassion and forgiveness. God understood why some people were driven to do wrong and forgave them for it. As a result, people who saw their neighbors getting away with criminal activity did likewise. Finally, God fashioned this world based on both law and compassion, which is why the text in verse 4 uses both divine names. So Yud-He-Vav-He representing the principle of compassion, and Elohim representing the principle of justice. And I'm just looking at that. That doesn't appear to be in verse 4. So I want to see where is the reference to Yud-He-Vav-He.
It's in verse
Okay,
5.
I got it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ele toldot hashamayim b'haaretz b'hibaram. This is the story of the generations of heaven and earth. Bayom asot Adonai, on the day Adonai, Yud He Vav He, Elohim, Eretz v'shamayim, earth and heaven. So yes. So I guess that's the first occurrence of what we would read as Adonai Elohim, because we don't pronounce that Yud He Vav He. Yud He Vav He is the personal name of God. So that is and Elohim, which interestingly is a plural form grammatically. Elohim we translate as God. So Adonai Elohim, we read that it's translated here, the Lord God. Elohim is generic. God, maybe you might think of it with a small g, but just could refer really to any God. You could talk about Elohim Acherim, other gods, whereas Yud He Vav He refers specifically to the God of the Jewish people. That is we see as God's name. And so Yud He Vav He is associated with the principle of compassion, and Elohim is associated with the principle of justice. And according to this midrash, those two are in tension with each other. Another midrash compares it to a hot liquid and a cold liquid. And if you pour either one in, it will break the vessel. But when God created the universe, it was as if God simultaneously poured justice and mercy into the world, because as this midrash that we just read suggests, either one or the other without both together is unsustainable.
May I suggest that it might be time for God to do a little refill?
You think we need
Justice and justice.
I think we need some fresh injection of both of those things.
both of those things? I thought
I
you
have
argued
two
just for
quick
compassion.
questions, Rabbi.
What's that?
I have two quick questions.
Sure.
The word Adonai Elohim,
Yes.
could that possibly ever be translated as God of gods? Like the head of all the gods.
All
All right, while you puzzle that one out, I was also interested that the word toldot in this translation is developments. And I've never heard it mean anything but generations.
Yeah, now that's so it's two interesting translation questions. So toldot comes from the same root as yeled, yalda, a boy and a girl, toldot. So development, yeah, there is. I can sort of see that it's an interpretive translation, I would say, but it's like what from one generation to the next, there is a sense of development that that is involved in that.
I always
Okay.
thought it was my God of gods.
So that's what Terry is suggested.
Yeah.
I'm puzzling over it, as she said, because I would think if you were going to say God of gods, it would be like Elohe, Elohim. It would be the same word repeated twice. So I think it's more like Terry the teacher. Or Bonnie the rabbi, Adonai Elohim, Adonai the God.
I kind of like the idea that we use the word Elohim because it is so encompassing, because it is a plural.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many facets, whether you look at not necessarily other gods, but so many facets as we look at it from almost every human being's perspective. And it's plural, so it includes all of that.
Yes. So
Rabbi,
one thing I think about, in the Shema, when we say Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai our God, Adonai Echad is one. I always think about that as whatever each of our individual
E pluribus unum.
Yeah, there you go. As every one of our individual perspectives, we're still all pointing to one God.
Rabbi Capel?
Yes, sir.
That relates to the thought I was having about the meaning of Adonai Elohim. The Elohim part, my thought is that it relates to what was extant at the time of many gods, each many gods being worshipped by different peoples for specific areas or functions then in the world. But this speaks to the idea that there is only one God who is the source of all creation, all power, all functioning, so that it all leads to just Hashem, and that's it.
Right, and yes, and when we say Hashem, we're referring to Yud He Vav He.
Yes.
So,
I just didn't want to say that.
Yes, so Hashem means the name. And
Yes.
so we don't pronounce God's name Yud He Vav He.
Right.
Our shorthand for that is Hashem, the name. We're not saying the name, but we're just saying you know what we mean. Does anyone else?
We all know who we're talking about.
Exactly. Does anyone else share I have a little tiny bit of discomfort with the fact that as we look at Adonai Elohim from our own perspective as Jews, that we say that our name for God, Yud He Vav He, is the compassionate one, whereas the universal name for God is associated with justice. That seems a little narcissistic to me, or certainly it's a little uncomfortable to me, like that we want to say, our God is the one that's all about compassion. That's, I feel a tug in my heart towards that idea of God's compassion, and then a little awkwardness about the fact that we associate that quality with our concept of God, whereas the universal God is the God of justice. Anybody else have that discomfort, or is that just me?
No,
It's
I
just
agree
you.
completely.
Yeah.
I think we all worry, you know, from the notion of the chosen people to this notion of, you know, the God of compassion versus the universal God. I think that's inherent in the struggle of Judaism.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Yud Hey Vav Hey appears first right after it is said that the story goes that that is when the heavens and the earth were created, so that the earth symbolizes justice, perhaps, and the heavens symbolize compassion. Yud Hey Vav Hey has both qualities in it, justice and compassion. You can't have one without the other.
What Felix said. Yeah. I mean, I'm having trouble with a definition on either side because I feel like it's not always compassionate. You know, why do things happen the way they happen? And social justice is something we should all be looking for, but is everybody looking for? Are other people in other religions looking at social justice?
Lisa,
I feel like it's all got to be one. You can't isolate definitions.
So yeah, I'm going to let Lisa jump in a minute, but I just want to point out, Merle, so here, that's precisely why we have Adonai Elohim
Right.
conjoined to indicate both that we need both elements. But listen to this: the Eitz Chaim has an interesting comment on that. This combination of the unique personal divine name Yud Hey Vav Hey with the general term Elohim appears 20 times in this narrative, 20 times in the story of creation, but only once again in the entire Torah.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't.
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever, like, I don't know, do I sit there and count when I read the Parsha?
What's the other part? What's the other place?
The other place is Exodus 9:30. So we'd have to, let's see what Exodus.
Dealing with what?
I don't know. I'm going to look it up right now. Exodus.
You're supposed to know that, Rabbi.
No,
it wasn't supposed to be a trick question.
Exodus 9:30. So it's in the story of the plagues, and Moses is rebuking Pharaoh, and he says, you and your servants are going to know, and ultimately, let's see, ultimately you will be in awe of or have fear of. We've talked a lot about that. You are mipnei Adonai Elohim. So basically, you know, you don't yet have appropriate awe of Adonai Elohim, or you don't have you don't yet have appropriate fear of Adonai Elohim.
Can I ask a question? So when you were saying a bit of discomfort that that our term is our God is compassionate, at the time of this creation and the recording of the creation story, would other populations in that part of the world talk about a compassionate God, or was for them God was always vengeful, maybe not even so just, but was it a unique consideration that God could be kind?
Yeah, an interesting point. Lisa has been trying to get in here though.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that, you know, I think all the world's great religions have some version of what we call the golden rule, that, you know, that this comes from the idea of a compassionate God. And I think that even includes Hinduism, which is an older tradition, I think, than Judaism. So I don't think we're alone in that idea of God as compassionate. I think there's probably hardly anything about God that we claim as Jews that other world religions don't also claim about God. So I guess I don't feel any discomfort there. Go for it.
Sarah,
Yeah, there's something that just came to mind too, that sometimes in these prayers when he says he's compassionate, he has passed some kind of judgment. So
Yes,
God
please.
is not only
A little
compassionate,
water.
he is judgmental,
I don't think you can really
And
base per
his-
se.
treating of us.
yeah, thanks, Sarah Lee. So, yes, so Adonai Elohim. We're gonna move on to verse 5 here in just a moment. Hopefully you had a chance in the handouts that Robin has for us. I wanted to just take a look at from On Sacred Ground, pages 18 and 19. If you
Never got that.
you can find that. I'll show you what the page. It's a comment from a Catholic priest on this verse, Shabbat Vayinafash. God rested and
I think you're breaking up.
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Yeah. So
It was in the Genesis 2 handout, Sarah Lee.
in the handouts, Robin is just putting the website back up for us again. It's a comment on and God rested Shabbat Vayinafash. And just as a reminder, Vayinafash related to Nefesh, which is soul, and the connection between soul and breath. So Shabbat Vayinafash, God rested and exhaled. Vayinafash. That's the feeling that we're supposed to have on Shabbat, like a big exhale, letting go, relaxing, moving tension. And Sherry's asking about commentary on this, Adonai Elohim. I'm sure that there is, Sherry, but I'm not sure about off the top of my head. And Robin, located, if you have those handouts, page 4. So this book, just as a reminder, On Sacred Ground, asks Jewish and Christian clergy to each choose one verse in the Torah and write like a couple of short paragraphs about why they love that particular verse. Why is that verse meaningful to them? So not every verse was selected. There are places where there are many people who chose the same verse, and then some that are unique. But so this is Monsignor Robert McNamara, was ordained a priest in Ireland in 1969 and has spent 42 years in 7 different parishes in Los Angeles. And at the time of this writing was pastor at St. Bernardine of Siena in Woodland Hills, California. And he selected this verse as his verse. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because in it God rested from all the work which God in creating had made. Nice translation, which God in creating had made, and God rested. So somebody want to read us what Monsignor McNamara has to say about this verse? Somebody
Got
have
it. I'll do it.
Thanks.
What a challenge to pick one verse out of all the others. This verse from Genesis is my choice. It is not my choice because of the wonder of creation or the Sabbath, but because it says that God rested. As a pastor, my world is a world full of deadlines, schedules, study, services, counseling, meetings, visiting the sick, and a multitude of administrative details. Communicating through email, voicemail, snail mail, and phone calls are the normal fabric of any given day. There are many moments of pressure, ranging from minor to significant. My world is hardly much different from that of others, specifically in my busyness. But it is in my busyness that I receive compliments, encouragement, and satisfaction. Even though there are moments of prayer, it is about my busyness that I talk. Ask me how my day went. I will talk about my busyness. And God rested. We gravitate to thanking and praising God for his 6 days of creation, and I do that. But most of all, he rested. I love that the author told us that. It is my permission to stop, to listen, and to sip coffee. In a world that is purpose-driven, goal-oriented, and managed by objectives, it is my permission to waste time with children in the parking lot and to hit a little white ball among trees and fairways. It is my permission to get off the merry-go-round and bask in wonder at the results of the 6 days of creation. He poured his energy into creation and then rested. I enjoy creation, suck energy out of it, and I rest. In a world where doing is valued more than being, I rest. The Almighty Being, the great I am, he rested.
There you go. Hey, Ron, did you hear that? You have permission from Monsignor McNamara to play golf. It's counterintuitive though, because, in Jewish tradition, you wouldn't play golf on Shabbat, but, it does. So anyway, I love the way he put that. And I just resonated with that, of course, being in a parallel profession. And also this idea, ask me how I'm doing and I'll tell you about my busyness. We define ourselves by our activity, not by our meditative, reflective moments alone. And for many people, and my mom, I think is an exemplar of this. Being busy is almost a moral issue. If you're not busy, if you're not productive, there's a negative moral connotation of that. I can't remember. How I save quotes. Obviously, you all know that, and I neglected to save this one quote, and it's one of my big regrets in life because I don't even remember what book I read it in, but I think it was The History of Love, but I'm not sure. The author said that for a New York woman, the greatest compliment that you can give is she's very busy. And true, mother? My mom is there, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Right. You take a lot of pride in being busy.
She's busy reading a book.
Yeah, Ron said she's busy doing something else right now while she's watching this Zoom because,
But I enjoy sitting down
God forbid she could just do one thing.
here with my
Isn't there
hands
the
under my
statement? Isn't there the statement that if you want something done, you ask a very busy person to do it? That's
true.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Mom? Sandy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say that I used to not be able to stand company when I was much younger and had surgery and had to be home. I couldn't wait to go back to New York to work. Now, though, I'm just happy if I can stay home and read a book, and just I don't consider it a waste of time. I consider it an enjoyment.
So I can't remember who said it, but time you enjoyed wasting is not wasted time.
Actually, that sign which says at the beach, time wasted is not wasted time.
There you go. So I will say, my mom, though, it took her probably to at least her early 80s to get that idea of, being allowed to rest and relax. I remember a very specific conversation, Mom, when you said you were moving from having to have 3 activities a day to only 2. And that was like a really big step and acknowledgement of taking a step back, resting a little bit more, giving yourself a little bit more space. But I think the Monsignor begs the question of how much do we define ourselves by our busyness, and how much judgment do we make of ourselves and others based just on being productive. I also think it's interesting to look at the difference between a Christian and a Jewish vision of what Shabbat might look like. And I remember Dennis Prager talking about this when he did his radio show, Religion on the Line, where he would interview a rabbi, a priest, and a minister, and sometimes representatives of other faith groups. And him pointing out that if you walked into an observant home on Shabbat, it would be immediately evident that this day was different, that the feel in the home, the activity in the home was different on Shabbat than on a weekday. And he said he would very often ask the Christian clergy, okay, you have church in the morning. If I came to your house on Sunday afternoon at 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon, how would I know that it was the Sabbath? And he said, most often the response was kind of a sheepish, well, you really wouldn't know the difference. So I think the question for us then is, how do we make sure that our Shabbat looks different from the rest of the week, however we interpret that? Most of us are not halachically observant Jews, but to do something to make our Sabbath day holy. And we know that the root of the Hebrew word holy is separate, different. David, yes.
Sorry about that. The one thing about Shabbat and God resting is the way it's phrased, and he rested. Hey, if I'm working for 6 days, I rested on the 7th. It's a first person. And if you take the size of the universe, and it does mention that God tried making other worlds first, then you have all sorts of different time frames and different planets. So God would be resting all the time from different places. So that aside, for me, the most amazing portion is the writers of the Torah said rested. They took a time out of our lives to say that God rested. Whether or not God did or not, people had a time to rest. That allowed us, slaves, dogs, cats, milking cows, whatever needed to be done, setting a time apart. This is completely unique. In any other culture that I'm aware of, there is no time set aside specifically for resting, whether it be study Torah or hitting little white balls across fairways. So I find this most unusual that the Torah says he rested, not I rested.
Yeah, so it's telling the story in the third person. I'm just looking up in the lexicon here, the root Shabbat, which is the root of Shabbat, which means to cease, desist, rest, comes from an Assyrian root, Shabbatu, which is to cease or to be complete. So I'm wondering, I know that the root of the word Shabbat goes back to another culture. It's a loan word from another culture. So I'm wondering if in that culture there was a sense of a Sabbath.
Assyrian or Syrian?
Assyrian. ASSY. Shabbatu. So I wonder if it's just the word that was borrowed, or if the word was associated with an idea of a Sabbath in that culture. I don't know the answer to that. But I wanted to.
It came from the number 7.
Sheva.
I don't think so. Sheva and Shabbat. I don't know. Let me see if we see anything about Sheva. Sheva, 7. Now it's a different root. It also has an Assyrian connection, CBC2. But I don't know if it's etymologically related to Sheva. So I wanted to turn now to, we have the JPS Torah commentary. This volume was written by Nachum Sarna, who is a recognized expert in the book of Genesis. He also wrote the Anchor Bible version of the commentary on Genesis earlier in his career. And you have there page 16 in your packet, because we're moving on to a whole new unit of discussion. And Sherry did a quick internet search for it. Did Assyrians have a Sabbath? The registered tablets of Elul, we read that there are 7. Okay, so they did have Sabbaths. Notwithstanding these differences, the calendar shows that a Sabbath similar to that of the Hebrews was well known in the Assyrians and Babylonians. So they did have a concept of Shabbat. Excellent.
So I know we're moving on, but so I looked at when it said Shabbat that it was abstain, which to me I think is great because you can get so busy in all of the details of staying in work and staying in work. So it just means, okay, you know what? Put that aside, do something else, go read a book, go do anything else. But I mean, and that in a way is resting. I mean, I don't like the idea. It's like rest. You got to sit around and twiddle your thumbs and not do anything. That's just, to me, it's, I mean, yeah, sometimes that's okay as well, but I really prefer the definition of meaning of abstaining, because it gives you perspective when you get away from something for a while. And then when you come back, you're like, oh, wait a minute. And it gives you a fresh look. And I don't know. So that's my thoughts on preferring it as abstain versus just rest.
Right. So it's not that we're doing nothing, we're doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi,
Yes, Barry.
someone sent me a cartoon recently, and it's nothing is an activity. And I think what we may be finding out is that, you know, and what was our busier life before, certainly before COVID, that we were always too busy doing something. And it really, in my mind, there's an expanded definition of nothing. Things that we would not normally have considered doing, we're doing now because our activities are restricted. We're not going to restaurants, not going to movies, not going to concerts, ball games, whatever. So we're finding time to do things that we would not have previously done because we considered it doing nothing. Maybe watching television, watching Netflix, whatever. And I think doing nothing is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay to do nothing every once in a while. We will extend, when this, God willing, this COVID thing ends, we will have learned that it's okay to do nothing and rest.
So I see a bunch of people who want to jump in, Merle and Felix and Becca. I also, and Marcy. So Merle, Felix, Becca, and Marcy in that order. I just wanted to also show you in the chat from Sue Monk Kidd, the idea of being nowhere, if you just open that word up, means you're now here. So maybe that's helpful to think about, just being more fully present in our lives, instead of imagining that we're nowhere if we're doing nothing. Okay, Merle, Felix, Becca, and Marcy.
So I'm thinking about camp on Shabbat, where in the morning we have breakfast services, and the kids have a very short study program of some kind. But then the rest of the day, there's no scheduled program like there is like the rest of the week. Your cabin doesn't have to be anywhere. You don't have to be anywhere. But in the afternoon, there are quiet contemplative programs that's not the usual hustle bustle of camp. And you're doing things. You're not sitting in your cabin staring at the four walls or at each other. You're doing stuff, but it's not stuff that you would ordinarily do on a day-to-day basis. And you're just kind of, you're with your friends, or you could be alone. I mean, there's no structure, but there are things for you to pick and choose, that you're expected to do something, but not just sit there and be bored all day long and like, why am I here today? And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's the same thing with Shabbat at home. You cut out the stuff that you ordinarily do that creates hassle in your day or some kind of stress, and you're just doing things that you enjoy maybe at home, whether, like Robin said, it's reading a book or you're doing something, but you're not sitting there. I don't think you have to sit there and stare at the four walls. I don't think you have to be stagnant, but I think that's part of the whole process, is doing something that's peaceful and quiet, meditative, however you want to establish it. I mean, people used to say it's not very Shabbos like when you go to the lake on a Saturday, but we're not doing anything when we go to the lake. We're sitting there enjoying the natural surroundings.
Right.
And so I think that it's fine to do something. I think a lot of people think, well, what do you mean I can't do anything on Shabbat? I think you just have to limit yourself.
So I think this is, very much coming from a Reform perspective. The challenge of Reform Jewish religious life is that since we are not considering ourselves to be bound by these outside strictures, then we have to create for ourselves what looks and feels like Shabbat for us. So it's the blessing and the curse of Reform Jewish life. In an Orthodox world, there are so many more structures that tell us precisely what to do, what not to do, how to do it.
Yes.
So that's both limiting and liberating in a way. Becca? Oh, no, Felix was next.
Felix, right.
Felix, yeah. I have a question. I'm not sure there's an answer. The question has to do with sleep and its relationship to Shabbos, if there is one. We've always studied that God rested on the Sabbath, and what that meant was that he just didn't work at creating anymore on that day, right? But on the 6 days that he worked in creating, did he work 24/6? You know what I mean? So and I am interested in very much interested in the meaning of numbers and what certain numbers mean, and the ratio of sleep to wake time is well 1 to 2, right? Or it's 1/3 of our day is loosely thought of as need for sleep. And at a certain point, it says God created night and day, right? So what is there in the scriptures or the midrash or anything? Is there anything written about sleep and why we need sleep, or when we think of God, we never think God is sleeping, do we? I mean, he's always there and watching and observing and sometimes intervening. So I guess, I don't know, I'm just musing about that.
Yeah, I think, to me, the concept of sleep is connected to having a body. It's part of our physicality that the body needs time for its own restoration. It's not unique to human beings, sleep. Where
that's interesting, Rabbi.
That's our animal nature, our physicality. And for the most part, other than in some Kabbalistic texts, we don't imagine God as having a body. And therefore God.
So Shabbos is more for the mind and the soul, and every night is more for our corporal being.
So let's just read what Lisa said. Jonathan Sachs in his commentary on Genesis says that creating is our essential human vocation and that we are summoned to creating. Okay, so for the Reform movement to create ideas around Shabbat sounds like we are doing our essential human thing. So that's Lisa's commentary on Sachs. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably, yeah, Jonathan Sachs might not have agreed with you. He was, after all, an Orthodox rabbi. But yeah, I would imagine that if I didn't have a body, I wouldn't need to sleep. Therefore, if God does not have a body, God does not need to sleep. So I was going to say that, you know, those the images that we have of God, you know, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, those are metaphorical expressions. We don't actually imagine God having hands and arms. Although, as I said in the Zohar, I haven't studied it extensively, but my understanding is there are Kabbalistic texts that talk about God's the anatomy of God's body.
Just one last comment. As you were talking, it occurred to me that it makes a lot of sense to connect sleep with the body, because when we're sleeping, we are still creating with our mind through our dreams.
And creating the restoration of every cell in our body.
Yeah.
That may be an unconscious process. Of course, dreaming is an unconscious process too. So
yes,
there's both physical and intellectual creation going on unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Becca.
So you read to us a few minutes ago that the origins of the Assyrian version of Shabbat, and as you were reading the couple of lines, if I remember this correctly, it said that it had to do with being complete. And that in combination with what we just read from Monsignor McNamara. So if during the week, our busyness represents the fact that whatever our task is something that's not complete, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. So our tasks always represent this effort to move on towards completion. We're moving and moving and moving, we're working and working and working, expending all of this energy to complete the task. And therefore, the Assyrian concept that Sabbath is a day that is complete would suggest that on that day, we cannot think of anything that's an unfinished task, that we must look at the day as completeness, which would also be our little glance at what heaven would be, which we've been told that Shabbat is a little glance, a little taste of heaven, and that would be completeness.
There you go. Nicely said. I wish I could remember. Anybody remember a couple of weeks ago when we were looking at various interpretations of Shabbat, there was a female rabbi, I believe, who said that when we enter Shabbat, even if we have work remaining to be done, we should enter Shabbat imagining that the work is already done. So even if we have tasks that are incomplete, part of our process is to let go of that. Although, you know, Robin talked about coming back to our work rested and restored and better able to work. And I know there are Jewish thinkers who object to this idea of the utilitarian model of Shabbat, that we should prioritize having a Shabbat, which is a day of rest and restoration and a day of holiness, not in service to the busyness of the rest of the week, but just unto itself. That it's sort of a devaluing of Shabbat, that if the only reason we rest is so that we can work better and more, then that somehow takes away from the idea of Shabbat. Okay, Marcy has the floor, and then Terry, and I also see a comment in the chat, so we'll look at that as well. But Marcy.
Mine's pretty short, I think. You were talking about the Orthodox has all the rules and all of that. I know somebody who's Orthodox. Her kids are now in their 30s and 40s, but when they were younger, they had all the activities in the school and all that. So Shabbat for them, for she and her kids and her parents, who also were in the same town, was you go to shul in the morning, you have lunch together, and then you do something as a family. And she told me they almost always had a jigsaw puzzle going. And that was sort of a requirement for Shabbat afternoon. We sit down as a family at this, card table or whatever, and we just quietly and peacefully work on the jigsaw puzzle. There's no running to do this. There's no TV because that's radio, whatever. That's all there was then. It wasn't the computer stuff. But she said every week they would work on jigsaw puzzles. And that was how they sort of calmed themselves into the feeling of Shabbat. And they were Orthodox. So I don't know how that was structured in halacha and all that stuff, but that's what they did.
Yeah. So my family had a very parallel practice when I was raising my kids. I grew up conservative, and I was the rabbi of a conservative synagogue. And the conservative practice is that you drive only to and from the synagogue, but not elsewhere. We also didn't use the phone. It was pre-cell phones, and we didn't use the landline, as we would call it now. And absolutely playing games. Our thing wasn't jigsaw puzzles, but we would play cards. We would play a rummy cube. We would go for a walk in the neighborhood. It very much supports family time, this model. All right, Kerry, and then let's take a look at what's going on in the chat. There's a whole nother class taking place here in the chat box. Okay. But Terry, you wanted to say something?
You're muted, Terry.
There were a few things that I'm going through my mind as we listen to all this. Felix's point, I love what you had to say, Felix. And now right this second, I can't recall what it was, but because I waited too long to talk.
It's okay. It's the feeling that's important.
Losing my mind. And Robin's comments, just the idea that, and what you said, putting those all together. I like the idea, as I'd like many things throughout Leviticus and some of the other places where we were given strictures of some sort or another, that even though it may not have been designed that way, and even though the state of psychology and anatomy and biology wasn't sophisticated when this was written, that accidentally Shabbat, the idea of clearing your head and doing other things, gives you the space to come back with a different. Taking a break is always a good thing. And when you're working on a mental task in particular, if most of us work mentally and not physically in this group, the idea of putting it all away for a few minutes for a day lets it come back in a different way, and it's a gift. So even if it wasn't intended that way, it accidentally worked to our benefit in terms of psychology. The other thing I was going to say is that when I was in high school, I was at Bethel. I grew up conservative also. And I was there when Rabbi Tutnauer was there. And the high school class had a privilege that nobody gets anymore. We would go to services on Saturday morning, and we would stay one day a month. We would stay the day with the rabbi. We would go to his house. We would sit around and talk. He essentially taught us what Shabbat could be. And in the afternoon we studied, and we said, we had our minyan, and then we were picked up about 4 or 5 o'clock. And it was the most amazing day. The Rebbitzin would give us a little lunch, and it was just a quiet, contemplative, peaceful day. And I wish it on everybody.
Yeah, I have goosebumps really hearing that. It's so beautiful. And you were picked up around 3
It
or
was
4,
amazing.
So you missed the Seudah Shlishi. There's a concept that you should have 3 meals on Shabbat. You have your Friday night dinner, you have your big kiddush after services, and then in the late afternoon there's the tradition of a Seudah Shlishi, a 3rd meal that would be like light refreshments with the
Right.
singing and studying
And that's what she did. And they called it that. I just forgot.
yeah. So we are over time, but Merle said if God has a mind, and she's imagining that God does have a mind, that mind would also need to rest. I don't know. I'm kind of holding with Maimonides' interpretation of God's attributes, that Maimonides' doctrine of God is the doctrine of negative attributes, that whatever we say, we can only say really what God is not. We can't actively say what God is, because God is so completely other that whatever words we use. So if we say God is compassionate, if we say that God is kind, if we say that God is caring, whatever we want to attribute to God is so fundamentally different from how we apply those attributes to ourselves, that really all we can say is what God is not. So to think about God as having a mind that's some way similar to a human mind that needs rest, I don't know if I'm ready to go there. And David Flack sent a private message. You want to summarize what you're saying there?
You're muted, David.
There, I got it, finally. The Torah was given at Sinai, but from what I understand, it was never written down. And it was carried in different people, I think they were called Baraitas, people who would remember it. Well, with the dispersion, all these people had left, but when Ezra and Nehemiah came back, they came back from the Assyrian cultural empire, not necessarily Assyrian political, but the cultural. They had the words. And so when they translated or took the oral translations and translated, they may have introduced Assyrian cultural values in making the translation, which would fit with the Hebrew values, but not necessarily the Hebrew we recognize today. So
Yes.
Shabbat and Shev.
Yeah. So once we committed to writing, it's already in some sense a translation.
Mhm.
We are over time, and Marcy points out that in a period before artificial lighting, people probably slept even more, yeah, because the lack of light. So anyway, thank you for the wonderful conversation. Have a good Thanksgiving, and we're not meeting next week, but hopefully I'll see you in other contexts. This afternoon from 2 to 4, we'll be at the temple for collecting items for Thanksgiving. So if you have any food items that you would like to donate for Thanksgiving meals for folks who could use that help, please stop by from 2 to 4. And if you're there, I'll see you then.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Huya aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al
Eno Moshe Israel. Imru. Amen.
Amen. Amen.